For a long time, people have been wondering whether Christopher Nolan might ever do a James Bond movie, and I myself have flipped between yes and no, depending on the schedule of his films and what the plans were for the Bond producers. That entire landscape has now changed, especially since Amazon have brought MGM. And in the last couple of days, there has also been a rumoured director's shortlist reported on by Puck News, who list 5 names in contention, and they all appear to be auteur-driven. If this is true, it changes things completely. And while the name Christopher Nolan isn't on this list, there are multiple things that make me believe he could actually be a main candidate. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing the new director shortlist for James Bond and why I think Christopher Nolan might actually direct it. Before I get into it though, if you want to see more content on the director, his Odyssey film, and the next James Bond movie, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating and subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's dive into why Christopher Nolan might direct the next James Bond film. So as reported on by Puck News, discussions for the upcoming Bond director are currently underway. A few months back, it was announced that David Heyman and Amy Pascal would take the lead as Bond producers, and the article states that they aim to appoint a director soon, followed by writing the script and then subsequently casting the next Bond actor. The producer duo has recently organised meetings with various filmmakers eager to create the pivotal first film of the post-Broccoli era. Among those rumoured to be in contention is Edward Berger, the director of the recently Oscar-nominated Conclave, who is said to have already presented his idea. Additionally, Dune director Denis Villeneuve is preparing to share his vision for a Bond film too. Another contender is British filmmaker Edgar Wright, known for his work on Shaun of the Dead and Baby Driver. Then there's also Paul King, recognised for Paddington and Wonka, and he has a long-standing collaboration with producer David Heyman. And finally, there's Jonathan Nolan, brother of Christopher Nolan, who is known for his work on Westworld, the recent Amazon series Fallout, and for co-writing several of Christopher Nolan's earlier screenplays. You might notice that every filmmaker on this list possesses a unique creative voice and a strong sense of authorship. And this raises the question of whether the newly appointed producers will allow for greater creative freedom. We won't have answers to these questions until the studio selects an official director, but the presence of such directors in the mix is certainly a sign that this could be the case. Now, there has been ongoing speculation that the Amazon acquisition might pave the way for lifelong Bond enthusiast Christopher Nolan to finally create his own Bond film. Naturally, Nolan insists on having final cut and more control over his projects, and securing that for a Bond film was always unlikely under the Broccolis. At present, Nolan is wrapping up the filming of his fantasy project The Odyssey, which is set to premiere in the summer of 2026. Last year, I did a video talking about why I didn't think it was likely that Christopher Nolan would be doing Bond for at least a good few years, and at that time, I didn't know about this director shortlist, nor did I know much about The Odyssey being his next film. However, I'm now beginning to change my mind a bit on Nolan potentially doing Bond soon, and I think there could be a few hints that suggest he may be in the running. To start with, it has now been nearly 4 years since No Time to Die, and in the time since that movie, Amazon purchased MGM, and we've waited patiently to see which direction the studio would go in with Bond. They've kept very quiet, and it seems like they have no problem waiting a bit longer before they announce a new director and actor. To me, this could be the first sign that they might be considering someone like Nolan as a main choice. The director has been busy for nearly 2 years with The Odyssey, which is following the release of his Oscar-winning film Oppenheimer, and he's got about 1 more year until his new movie comes out in theatres. During all of that time, not a single announcement towards the next Bond film has been made, and all we've had are Bond actor rumours and this new director shortlist rumour too. Now, I do actually think that the director shortlist is somewhat accurate, and I think that within that list comes another hint of Christopher Nolan potentially being the one they consider. The hint I'm talking about is Christopher Nolan's brother Jonathan Nolan, and the reason I say this is because he hasn't directed a full theatrical film before, and the last time he was involved with one was co-writing screenplays for some of his brother's earlier films. Jonathan Nolan has co-written the screenplays for The Prestige, The Dark Knight Rises, and Interstellar, and he also received an uncredited writing credit for Batman Begins. Furthermore, he wrote the short story for Chris Nolan's first film, Memento. Now, Christopher Nolan had originally shared interest in making Bond publicly when he was still working with his brother. So what if Jonathan Nolan being on this shortlist is actually him being attached as a co-writer proposing his idea? If that is the case, then there's only one director they would be turning to. Both Nolan brothers have talked about their love for Bond and doing a movie together at some point in the future, and now that Amazon have control and there's a good chance that we'll see an auteur-driven Bond film, I think now is the time for Christopher Nolan. So yeah, I've actually changed my opinion on this because I think there could be some signs here that point towards Chris Nolan getting to do it. The auteur director thing is a massive aspect that changes the landscape, and then Jonathan Nolan joining the shortlist and them taking all this time to announce it only makes me wonder further. Now sure, it might turn out to go in another direction, and if it does, I love nearly every director on this recent list. For instance, if Denis Villeneuve was to do Bond or we got to see an Edgar Wright take, that would be so interesting to see unfold. But there's something about now that just makes me think it's Nolan's time to make one. You gotta think, he last worked on franchise films around 13 years ago, and if he was to make one more trilogy or a series of films, it would probably be his last due to the amount of time and effort it takes to make them. Nolan also works on other films not connected to the franchise he makes in between, as we saw with The Prestige and Inception during the Dark Knight trilogy's run. So I think if he was to make one more trilogy or a film series, it would be James Bond, and I think if he's ever going to do it, now is the time. Sure, we probably have to wait until 2028 at the earliest to see it, because he'd start filming a bit after the Odyssey's release in 2026. But if you were Amazon and you announced that Christopher Nolan was doing a Bond movie, I don't think you mind waiting another year or two, especially when you've already waited 3 years or more and suggested that auteur filmmakers like those on the recent shortlist are those who you are looking at. All of the creators on the list are those that I think would be both respectful to the history of Bond, but then also bring their creative stamp to a Bond film. And Nolan has been one of the best examples of that creative approach, both with his time on the Batman franchise, but then also how he applies his filmmaking style to every project he makes. So I think there's a lot of pointers that lead me back to the idea of Christopher Nolan making this next Bond film. What I will say is that if there is no announcement of a director for Bond 26 by the end of this year, then I think the chances of Nolan doing it drastically go up. If he was doing it, you'd likely hear about it a few months after the release of the Odyssey in July of 2026. So the closer we get to that date, I think Nolan may be the one. But that was my video discussing the potential of Christopher Nolan making the next James Bond movie. I'm interested to see what direction Amazon will go in, and like I said before, I do think that any of the picks on the shortlist of directors are great choices. But again, there's something about how long they've taken, that Jonathan Nolan is now attached, and the other reasons I've given in the video that makes me believe that Christopher Nolan might actually get his time. We'll have to see, because at the minute, it's all just speculation. But let me know down below in the comment section whether you think Christopher Nolan might make the next James Bond movie, and if not, do you like the other potential candidates on the rumoured director's shortlist? For much more content on Christopher Nolan and his future projects, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.